Joining us now to talk about all of this, Elamin Abdelmahmoud, social media editor at BuzzFeed Canada. Jonathan Kay is an author and freelance columnist. And Robin Urbach is opinion editor at CBC News. So, John, you've actually written a book about this. You've written a lot about conspiracy theories. They've always been around, but now you've got them sort of in the mainstream media. You've got them sort of in the White House. What's going on?
Well, conspiracy theories tend to be theories of evil and of illegitimate power. And the whole basis of the Trump presidency is the idea that there are illegitimate elites who are running the world. And so it's not surprising that Trump himself, who was at the center of the so-called birther movement 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that he would still have a fondness for this sort of thing, and he would surround himself with people who enable these kind of conspiracy theories. It's true that I wrote a book about it back in 2011, and I mentioned Trump, but never in my wildest dreams would I imagine that he would actually become the president. In that book, I described conspiracy theorists as on the margins, and I worried about them becoming more prominent. But nowhere in that book, unfortunately, did I predict that one of them would actually occupy the White House.
What's your sense, Robin? Like, why is this happening? Are they getting crazier? What's going on?
Well, I mean, as John has sort of said, conspiracy theories have been around forever. As long as humans have been able to think, people have been able to think outside the box, which is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about conspiracy theories. It's someone who rejects the mainstream narrative in a way. What's different now is a generation ago, or even a few decades ago, if you had a conspiracy theory about Hillary Clinton being a secret lizard person, which I think actually is...
David Icke.
Yes.
Yep.
So you would be resigned to sort of scribbling on the wall of your mom's basement, writing out your theories and going about your happy way. Now you can post that on Facebook. It's shared 20, 30, 40 times, even more than that. And suddenly you're getting emails from someone in Zurich telling you that he spent his life, you know, investigating the relationships between reptiles and humans and whatever. So it's really, you know, the idea that these theories are on the fringes is kind of going out because we're getting that gratification immediately. So you can put out some wild theory, you can get people to sort of back your idea, and because of that, they're sort of seen to have this kind of false legitimacy in a way.
We're laughing, but it's really not that funny.
No, it isn't. And you know, I think for me particularly, what's interesting about it is that Trump has a very elegant way of putting a conspiracy theory out there. And I say this hesitant to use the word elegant, but he will just say this thing where he's like, I've heard this, you know, and he will just put that thought out into the world. So, for example, when Justice Antonin Scalia died, he said, you know, I've heard the rumor about how there was a pillow on his face. And then all of a sudden, you hear all these conservative blogs saying, you know, this conservative justice of the Supreme Court might have been murdered. Why isn't the liberal...
But what's in it for him? Why is he embracing these?
A lot of power, right? Because he gets to appeal to... I mean, he's holding on to his base because he gets to say, I'm looking at stories that that other people are not looking at. So he gains credibility. He continues to be the authority figure for those people because mainstream media won't cover those stories because they're insane. But then Trump comes along and says, you know what, I hear what you're saying, and I think the mainstream media is hiding something from you. So maybe they should be looking into it. And he just appeals to them and their logic.
So why doesn't the mainstream media cover these things, John?
Because it ends up being... Look, if you're at the New York Times, you're at the Washington Post, you know, you spend 10 minutes looking at some of these stories and you might feel, oh, this is an insult to our readers' intelligence. I'm not even going to bother covering it. Like in the case of, for instance, the Seth Rich story where you have people alleging that a tragic, fatal murder that took place in Washington, D.C. was somehow connected to WikiLeaks and Russia and this massive cover-up. The Washington police themselves say that's not the case. And so
why does Fox then? I mean, that is mainstream media.
Well, that's mainstream media. Fox has to do it because they're competing against the internet. Fox is a very interesting example because Fox is a bridge. Fox is a quasi-respectable network. So if you go to Alex Jones' InfoWars, that's a conspiracy theory website. Everybody knows that. And everybody knows that, say, the New York Times or NPR or Washington Post is respectable. Fox is in a very interesting place because Fox has one foot in one world and one foot in the other. And as such, Fox can legitimize stories, and then maybe a week later they can retract and say, oh, sorry, we were wrong about that, we're not going to cover it again. But the damage has already been done. There's no equivalent media on the left in the United States that acts as a quasi-legitimate enabler that's a bridge between the
Well, you're on
crazy
social media. You
conspiracists.
must get caught in this. Do you get people saying, why aren't you covering this story?
All the time, right? Because I mean, like every time that I work for BuzzFeed News, and every time we put out a tweet about a specific story, we get a bunch of people who are on the fringes saying, this is not the real story. Maybe you should be looking into Seth Rich, or maybe you should be looking into this other story that no one's heard of. But Fox listens to those people, and they find an audience with those people.
And they have to compete, because if Fox, I'm sure there are people at Fox News who know that these are crazy stories, but they also know that if they don't at least give it some oxygen, if Tucker Carlson doesn't go on and talk about it, then people are going to ignore Fox News, and they're just going to spend all their time on Reddit or other sites that do. So it ends up being a game of survival for right-wing media.
But why is it so attractive? Like, why do people like this stuff?
I think there are a variety of reasons when we talk about why people buy into them. I think part of it is just sort of like a club aspect. It feels good to be part of a community of people who have like-minded ideas and can sort of reaffirm those theories that you have within yourself. I think there's also a bit of a high that you get from them too. When we're talking about some of these mainstream conspiracy theories, generally they involve issues that get your blood boiling. So they're about politics, religion, medicine, et cetera. And when we talk about them, we get sort of like a rush of adrenaline. And this is a cause that we feel like we need to fight for. So when we're talking about Seth Rich, it's, well, this just proves that the whole Russian conspiracy in the U.S. election was fraudulent, and I'm going to go out and fight for the truth. So I think it sort of reinforces this idea that we are doing good. We know the truth. We are part of this movement of a select group of enlightened people who know what's actually going on versus the lemmings who just sort of listen to the mainstream news and don't think critically about it.
Most of the big headlines have been American. What are there any Canadian conspiracy theories?
Of course there are. And I'm not going to name just one website. Well, I will name just one specific website, and I think that's Ezra Levant and the Rebel, who every once in a while will traverse in conspiracy, and he will like to appeal to a certain audience in Canada who's interested in that kind of thing. A good example of that was as soon as the Quebec shooting happened earlier this year.
At the mosque.
That's right, at the mosque. He created a website called QuebecTerror.com, which he bought almost a few minutes after that happened.
.ca, if I remember correctly.
That's right. That's right.
Not to be confused with the more respectable QuebecTerror.com.
Yeah, that's right. But and then his correspondents spent quite a bit of time trying to link reports that are completely bogus about another Muslim shooter who actually did the act.
Which police said did not exist.
That's right. Police said
This actually goes to an interesting trend in Canadian conspiracism, is that 20 years ago, leading Canadian conspiracy theories, or the most popular Canadian conspiracies, tended to come from the left. They tended to be about the United States and about the idea that the United States was going to swallow up Canada. It was a very popular conspiracy genre. Now, the leading source of conspiracism in Canada and probably in the United States often involves Muslims. And the idea that this or that Canadian politician, such as Justin Trudeau or Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, are secret agents of Islam. And in that way, there's kind of a perverse similarity between the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that existed for centuries. If you just substitute Jew for Muslim, a lot of the conspiracy theories are exactly the same.
But a lot of these theories are nonpartisan too. Like if we look at things that involve medicine, for example, autism, the connection between the MMR vaccine and autism, that any left or right.
The non-existent.
The non-existent.
We hasten.
Important to clarify that.
Yes.
In Canada, we had a conspiracy theory about Castro being Justin Trudeau's father.
Right. Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
Which is hot, but totally untrue.
So you say.
Yeah.
I'll send you a link later. You'll see.
Yeah.
So I agree with John to a certain extent. I mean, we've seen sort of this sort of movement from left to right and vice versa, but I think there are, the idea of conspiracy theories itself isn't sort of the domain of the left or the right.
It's an explanation for evil. People crave an explanation for evil, and whether it's medical evil, whether it's 9/11, whether it's what they regard as an unholy political result, like the election of Barack Obama or someone else they don't like, people crave an explanation for it. And when someone like Trump provides it, even if the facts seem implausible, to them there's a grain of moral truth to it, and they want to believe it's true.
I don't know if it's just evil, because to me, there's this whole conspiracy theory that Bill M103 is like this Trojan horse that Muslims are trying to get through so that Sharia law can begin to take over the country. And to me, that comes from observing from the world around you and saying, there are more Muslims around in the country than there were 10 years ago, 15 years ago. What is happening? Maybe they have some sort of political clout. So it's just Like, try to explain change. Like, it's people who are just afraid.
I got to cut you off, Rama. We're out of time. I was going to ask, can this actually be stopped? But seeing as it's been around for eons, probably not.
People watching sensible folks like us, that's the antidote. Yeah.
We'll fix everything. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great summer.